At this stage of the game, number one is stop making any more of it, which means shut down in an orderly manner all of the nuclear reactors that exist. But the waste that exists, I think the best thing that you can do is to leave it where it is, but take it out of those swimming pools and put it in dry concrete casts and let it sit there. As a matter of fact, I think that's what should be done with the reactors themselves. I think that it is a mistake to spend billions of dollars cutting up an old reactor into pieces, exposing the workers to the radioactivity, and putting it in a shallow grave somewhere. I just think that they should remain as monuments to an effort that was tried in good faith and failed, namely nuclear power. We need to replace it with what we now know is truly clean energy, solar, wind, and we know how to store electricity so that we can use it when we need it, and that would create a huge number of jobs to build the replacement power. But the point that I'm making is that it will be cost effective over time to do that, because if we keep these nuclear power plants running, it's going to cost so much money to make them safe enough even to meet the NRC standards, because the earthquakes are now, we realize, larger than we anticipated. So that requires rebuilding these things. That's really what enabled me to shut down the plants in the Tennessee Valley after 3 Mile Island. Then we had a Nuclear Regulatory Commission appointed by President Carter that was pretty strict, and they made us almost rebuild the things to make them safer. I'm hoping that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission will come down with post-Fukushima lessons that will require costs that will be prohibitive. So the economics is what can shut these plants down, and if you look at all of them with water shortages throughout the country, I think you'll find that each one of these plants, that in order to make them compatible with the environment, it's too expensive. You know, they advertise this stuff is too cheap to meter, but what it's turning out to be is too expensive to use.
And how much water do they use?
Well, they take enormous amounts of water. They don't consume the water. They consume a bunch of it through evaporation. But if you take the water out of a river or out of the ocean and run it to dissipate the heat, you're going to lose a lot of it in evaporation. But what happens is in the summertime, the water itself, it gets so hot that you can't use it anymore. So the power plant has to be shut down. So the nuclear power plants are chasing their own tail here. Global warming is making them less useful. And I think it's a technology that we tried in good faith in the 70s, and we just need to phase out of it. I'm not saying that every plant could be shut down overnight, but certainly one that, like San Onofre, that's leaked steam and that pretty clearly now needs new steam generators that I don't think the utility is willing to pay for itself. You know, we need to give it a decent burial. One of the reasons why Friends of the Earth is focusing on California, because it's a state that's declared itself wanting to have a clean energy future. It's already mandated that 33% of the electricity by 2020 has to be renewable, and I think it is a state where we've already shown in Sacramento that you can bury a nuclear power plant and get along real fine without it, in fact better, and the whole state can set that example. I think can have a tremendous impact. That's why I'm spending my 86th year trying to help make it happen. The rules that came out after 3 Mile Island required existing plants. In fact, it required plants under construction to change. You know, that raises an interesting point. The industry is bragging about how much safer their new design is than the existing plants. Well, if you turn that sentence upside down, what they're really saying is these old plants are a whole lot more dangerous than the new ones. And mostly the new ones are being opposed. So there's even more reason why we ought to be focusing on the old ones, because they're the ones that are truly dangerous, and they need to be phased out. The ones near earthquakes need to be shut down, I think, right away, especially one that has a steam generator that's leaking radioactive steam and they don't know how to fix it. And and I don't see how the consumers of California are going to pay another $670 million for new steam generators. I think that's where the rubber hits the road, when the economics begin to show that the plant is going to cause rate increases. Then I think we have the public support for getting them shut down. I would say that they ought to just use a little common sense here. Our experts have said that reducing the speed, or that is the power, isn't going to cure the problem. As a matter of fact, there's a great danger that you reach a certain level that increases the vibration. The plant, the steam generators are defectively designed. I think the NRC is about to admit that themselves. So it's kind of like if you're driving your car down the road and steam starts coming out of the radiator, and you say, "Sweetheart, we hadn't got time to stop, we'll just slow down." That ain't going to stop it. If something is broke, you've got to stop and fix it, or get a new car. And that's a very simplistic analogy, but I think it's true. That if they don't, it's the design that is inherently flawed, and there is no rational scientific basis for assuming that operating at a lower speed is going to cure the problem. And you've got tubes that wore out in 18 months that were supposed to last 40 years. So you're going to make 6 million people in Southern California guinea pigs while you experiment whether you can get by another year or two at reduced speed? I don't think so. I don't think that's safety first. I think that's safety last.
And what do you say to some very prominent people around the world that are claiming that nuclear renaissance is necessary to save the planet from climate change?
I just say they're wrong. Anybody that would substitute plutonium for carbon needs to think again. They're not thinking. They are without knowledge of the potential for solar, wind, and storage. They just haven't thought it through. They are the victims of the propaganda machine, which is the oil industry, which tries to tell people, yeah, we're for solar and wind. They're something we'll do 10, 15 years from now. They're the power plants of the future, and they always will be. That kind of propaganda has infected the President of the United States, who's in the State of the Union said he's for all of the above. Well, that's just plain wrong. Mother Nature is not for that policy. The carbon keeps going up, but nuclear power just got through wiping out a good chunk of Japan. It's already wiped out a good chunk of the Ukraine, and we have no idea of how many cancers are caused by nuclear power because the radiation is a death ray, but it's invisible. And they keep saying nobody died at 3 Mile Island, but the power plant died. It was over $1 billion, and radiation is emitted. The fact that you can't prove it doesn't mean it doesn't exist, and we know that there is no threshold level, that all radiation kills genes, and it carries down from one generation to another. Nobody in their right mind would build a radioactive factory rather than putting some solar panels on the ground. And that's the choice. And so I say to people who say that we need to have nuclear power is, think again. Don't just have a knee-jerk reaction based upon the advertisement of the energy industry and the so-called energy experts, who are the victims of their own bias and lack of knowledge. And besides, you have to realize that GE owns part of NBC, I think, and Westinghouse owns part of CBS. The media is pro-nuclear because the nuclear industry kind of owns big chunks of the media, and they spend lots of money on advertising. You know, you could stop nuclear power with just one law: eliminate the federal insurance for nuclear power. Now, you would never drive a car that couldn't get insurance, and so you're in favor of a technology that the marketplace will not insure. You know, even a child, when they put their hand on a hot stove, learns not to do it again. We are underreacting to Fukushima. You know, it is a frightening experience. Yes, I think it's frightening, but that's not an overreaction. That's just facing the truth, the facts, the possibility. There is an old, just colloquial expression that says that anything that can go wrong will at the worst possible time. The worst possible time is when it happens. And it's just a question of when, not whether. You don't need an expert to recognize that power plants, as they age, become more susceptible to breaking down. They're not fundamentally different than human beings. You know, metals deteriorate, little things like the insulation on a wire will wear out over time. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission is so religiously caught up in nuclear power. They actually had a meeting the other day, a public meeting, I think it was on June the 7th, in which they were considering 80-year operating licenses for these plants. Now, that is a particular form of insanity that I think is incurable, in that they have a religious belief in this technology. Over an 80-year period, we have no idea of what can break down and go wrong in a power plant, but we certainly have a pretty good idea that the chance of an earthquake near then becomes very, very real. So, but basically, you know, the public has got to assert itself on this issue, because those radioactive dogs might sleep for a long time, but when they wake up, they don't just bark, they bite.